The rain drizzled over the city, dissolving neon lights in the puddles on the sidewalks. The air was filled with the scent of wet asphalt and freshly ground coffee from a small cafe on the street corner. Under umbrellas, pedestrians hurried by, each absorbed in their own affairs, paying no attention to the man in a dark coat standing by the entrance of the massive courthouse building. Trump stopped on the steps, scanning the gray building with its high windows and massive columns. Inside, dim light glowed. The security guard by the door gave a brief nod as he approached. "Good morning, Mr. Trump." The guard opened the door, letting him inside. Trump walked through the marble hallway to the large courtroom. The tall wooden panels on the walls created a sense of ancient authority and unshakable order. In the center of the room, lawyers, journalists, and a few civilian observers were already seated. "The hearing will begin in a few minutes," one of the assistants quietly informed him as he passed by. Trump sat at the long table, feeling the eyes on him. The room gradually filled with people, and the noise of voices grew louder. His lawyer, a gray-haired man in a perfect suit, sat beside him, nervously flipping through papers. "We have all the evidence. This is a clean case," the lawyer said confidently. "We'll see how it goes," Trump replied quietly. The doors at the far end of the room opened, and the judge entered. A tall man in his 50s, wearing a black robe, with a confident gaze and a cold smile. He walked to his place and sharply struck the gavel on the wooden table. "Please be seated," the judge's voice echoed in the high walls. The room fell silent. Today's hearing concerns the potential violation of the electoral process during the recent presidential race. The judge began in a steady tone. "I ask both parties to present their arguments." Trump sat calmly, listening to the opposing lawyer's speech. He spoke of some technical violations, accusing Trump of lying and distorting results. But Trump barely listened. His focus was on the judge, sensing something strange in his behavior. The judge sat too straight, too calm. His gaze seemed empty. Then the judge spoke. "Actually, there's no point in continuing this hearing. We all know that Biden is better than Trump. He should be president." The room erupted. "What?" Trump's lawyer jumped up. "Your Honor, this is beyond the scope of the process." "It's the truth." The judge leaned forward, his eyes glowing with cold fire. "Biden must be president. Immediately." The guard by the door reacted instantly. He rushed toward the judge, but the man had already risen from his seat. Journalists raised their phones, recording every second of the chaos unfolding in the room. "Your Honor, you need to leave the room," the tall man in uniform said loudly. The judge suddenly laughed. "You don't understand? I'm just telling the truth." "Take him out," the guard ordered sternly. Two men in black suits grabbed the judge by his arms and pulled him toward the exit. He struggled, but not very strongly. There was a strange smile on his face. Trump watched silently, not moving. Once the judge was escorted out, silence fell in the room. All eyes were on him. Trump stood up, feeling the tension in the room mix with surprise and fear. "What just happened here?" the lawyer whispered. Trump glanced around at the people present and then calmly said, "It seems we've just been shown the true face of the system." He slowly walked toward the exit, leaving behind silence and dozens of unanswered questions in the eyes of the people. Trump sat in the courtroom, surrounded by an atmosphere of tension. The loud footsteps of the guards, the creaking of the wooden benches, and the indistinct whispers of those present, all of this created the impression that something more than a routine hearing was taking place. At the judge's table sat a middle-aged man with a gaze that left no room for doubt, corrupt Judge Garrett. When the hearing began, Garrett made a few general comments about Trump. But then his tone suddenly changed. "We live in times when some leaders, well, they find their way into the hearts of the people, and others, well, I'm not so sure anymore." "Isn't that right, Mr. Trump?" the judge began, his voice calm but unpleasantly sarcastic. Trump raised an eyebrow, his expression neutral. but inside he felt a flutter of unease. Was this just an offhand remark? Or was it a veiled criticism? "I don't understand what you're getting at," Trump replied calmly, not losing his composure. Judge Garrett smiled again, as if he wasn't merely asking a question, but searching for an opportunity to provoke conflict. He glanced at his notes on the table and continued, "This issue is no longer in my hands. Looking at the situation in the country, I must say there is another candidate who could do the job better. His name is Joe Biden. I am convinced he is the one who will lead the country to success. And in my opinion, he should be president." In just 5 minutes, once we finished this hearing, silence fell in the room. Trump began to nervously shift in his seat, his face frozen in a mix of surprise and indignation. This moment had changed everything. Garrett's gaze was confident, smug, yet somewhat indifferent. Trump didn't respond immediately. His eyes focused on the judge, and he tried to control the emotions rising in his chest. Finally, he spoke with cold determination. "It's not your place to decide who should be president. You're trying to provoke me, but you're mistaken, Judge. I will defend myself and my honor." The judge chuckled lightly, as if it were a game, and continued, "How do you like that? I'm sure the people would choose a leader who isn't afraid to speak the truth. But you still have 5 minutes in this process, and I have the right to express my thoughts." But Trump didn't back down. He knew he had to act quickly, and this hearing no longer held any meaning. At that moment, when the tension in the room was growing, the doors suddenly opened. One of the guards appeared and without a word approached the judge. Garrett sized him up with a glance, but the guard simply said, "Your removal is in effect. You are to leave the room immediately." Everyone in the room froze. The judge stood, refusing to believe what was happening, but the guard, without hesitation, led him away. Trump watched the scene, his heart pounding faster. So this is how it works? Suddenly, the judge, who once held power, became the subject of dismissal. And this wasn't just the end of one case. It was the changing of the entire system. Feeling the pressure ease, Trump quietly said, "This is only the beginning." Trump stood in place, watching as the guard escorted Garrett out of the courtroom. It was an unusual moment. The system that had seemed unshakable had suddenly faltered. Those present, including politicians, lawyers, and journalists, whispered among themselves. But Trump had no intention of losing focus. This wasn't a coincidence, it was a message. He turned to his lawyer, who sat beside him. "What does this mean? Why did he leave the room?" The lawyer, a middle-aged man with a notably neat appearance, nervously leaned back in his chair. "This could be part of a bigger conspiracy," he said, holding documents on his lap. "Garrett was just one of many working in the shadows. We're getting a signal that even bigger changes are coming at the judicial level." Trump listened carefully to his words, but he knew one thing. He couldn't stop. He needed to act, and act now. Every minute counted. Overall, the hearing was suspended, but Trump wasn't planning to sit idle. He quickly made his way out of the room, his steps decisive and confident. The closer he got to the exit, the more he was filled with a palpable sense of hope. What had happened today wasn't just an ordinary coincidence. It was the beginning of a major redistribution of power. Judge Garrett, of course, was only a part of this mechanism. Outside, Trump looked up at the sky, feeling the wind brush against his face. He wasn't ready to give up. Now that the serious games were entering their active phase, he had no intention of backing down. The logic of this game was simple. No opponent could be too strong if you always kept your finger on the pulse. His smartphone buzzed with a message from one of his old partners, Peter. He was aware of what was happening behind the scenes, and now, evidently, he was trying to share some important information. Trump quickly dialed the number. "Trump will help you, but you have to be prepared for a period full of surprises. You have no idea who's behind these events," Peter said, his voice sounding anxious. "Who is it?" Trump asked without hesitation. You could say they're old acquaintances. Those who've been in the shadows for a long time, but have the power to influence things. All these changes. It's just the beginning. And if you want to stay on top, you'll have to act fast. Trump frowned. What he was hearing didn't sound good. But one thing was clear. He was on the right track, even if he was heading straight into the eye of the storm. Thanks, Peter. I'll wait, but be careful. If these people are after me, I know how to deal with them. You know my methods well enough. Trump hung up the phone and looked out at the horizon. He knew difficult days lay ahead, but if anyone could withstand this storm, it was him. The only question left was, who else was behind these events? And how far would this struggle go? The next few weeks were filled with constant tension for Trump, feeling that every step could lead to new challenges. He met with partners, listened to advice, but increasingly, a plan of action was forming in his mind. He understood the time for doubts had passed. Now he had to act, and act decisively. One evening, after yet another meeting with his lawyer, Trump received a call. It was Peter. His voice sounded calm, but Trump immediately sensed that this wasn't just a casual conversation. You're right, Trump. They're trying to corner you from all sides. But there's one thing you can do not only to protect yourself, but also to change the game. Trump gripped the phone tightly, feeling his heart race. I'm ready to listen, he replied, his voice calm but filled with determination. They want you to back down. They don't like how you're holding your ground. But if you show them you're standing firm, they'll back off. You already know what to do. You've always known how to do it. Trump didn't respond, but understood that it was time for an open move. He needed to make a decision that would leave no room for doubt. He gathered his team and headed to the courthouse. When he entered the courtroom the next day, the atmosphere was tense. But he didn't allow himself to back down. Garrett was no longer in the room, and the judge who replaced him seemed determined to maintain neutrality. Trump approached the microphone, took a deep breath, and said, I have no intention of giving up. This isn't just politics or personal interests. This is a fight for justice, and I'm here to continue that fight. Everyone in the room held their breath, and Trump, watching the reaction, felt the weight of the situation finally beginning to lift. The real change wasn't in the words, but in his actions, in his calm but determined demeanor. He knew that now was the moment when change could happen. The courtroom remained silent, but in that silence was hope. The hope that even a small step, when made confidently and decisively, could be the beginning of real change. And although the struggle wasn't over yet, Trump knew change wouldn't come automatically. It begins with those who aren't afraid to stand their ground. The ending of the story was not yet determined, but one thing was clear. The path to true change always lies through determination and the ability to stand firm, no matter what.